Welcome to Coloring Crypto. Today we have on Andrew Chapin, who is the founder of Chapin Labs, of which Coloring Crypto is a subsidiary. And so Andrew's an ICO consultant, and one of his first clients was the now sort of notorious Munchee, which was busted by the SEC. Andrew was a guest on episode 6 of Coloring Crypto. Munchee was a guest of episode 8, and we're going to revisit Munchee and what happened, what went wrong with them as kind of a use case, and what's sort of the state of SEC regulations today with ICOs. But before we do that, I've got Dan on the line, the producer here. And Dan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Gabe. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. We're going to introduce folks a new kind of feature here. We're going to start out with some updates on what's happening these days in the world of crypto. So Dan, what have you got for us?
From the Coloring Crypto News Desk, I'm Dan Weiner. Tom Lee, former chief equity strategist at JP Chase, says the latest crypto sell-off, which has the top 3 coins down over 20% in the last 2 weeks, is due to a capital gains hit by investors. Lee said that as the U.S. income tax deadline looms, investors are having to sell off portions of some $25 billion in capital gains to pay the government. However, that hasn't stopped Lee to tell CNBC he predicts Bitcoin will reach $25,000 by the end of 2018. In other news, a video went viral in the crypto world this past week as Ethereum creator Vitalik Buterin, who was attending Deconomy, had some choice words for Craig Wright, who has famously proclaimed himself as the Bitcoin creator. Listen here.
So given that he makes so many non-sequiturs of mistakes, why is this fraud allowed to speak at this conference?
Yeah. As you heard there, Buterin referred to Wright as a fraud. Buterin then took to Twitter to make further comments on Wright. And finally, taking a quick look at the ICO market in 2018, in the first quarter of the 161 ICOs reported to CoinSchedule, they've raised a combined $5.8 billion. Far outpacing the $3.8 billion raised in the entirety of 2017. March of 2018 was the single largest ICO month yet, with a total of $2.95 billion raised, led by Telegram.
That last point is really interesting, I think, particularly because so many people are seeing the kind of bear market with cryptocurrency these days, and the SEC regulations getting a little bit more clear, and sort of the belief that ICOs are not happening at the pace they were, but man, those numbers don't support that.
Absolutely. 80% of what was raised in all of 2017 happened in a month.
Wow. I also saw something on Coinbase is now got like an investment wing, and they're investing in startups. They made very clear they're not trying to invest in future coins or kind of like seed future coins for their exchange, but are even investing in competitors, which I think is kind of like a long-term view we're seeing in 2018, which is less focused on the hype of the coin and really the core business and the founders and the idea and how well they can execute on a true solution to a true problem. Welcome to Coloring Crypto. This is our episode following our April Fool's joke. So if you didn't get a chance, go back and listen to that one. We thought it was pretty hilarious. We got some great feedback and, of course, a couple haters, but that always happens when you do an April Fool's joke. So I've got Andrew Chapin on the line, the founder of Chapin Labs. How you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing well, Gabe. How are you?
So I'm doing great, man, and I'm looking forward to this episode because I find this topic comes up in conversation with sort of crypto folks where I'm hanging out in Los Angeles, and the topic is Munchee. And Munchee is a client that you had, one of your early clients that you were an advisor on as an ICO. We had them on the Coloring Crypto podcast in episode 8, and they were busted by the SEC.
Yeah.
And I know you're also posting an article on Hacker Noon about this topic. So this is kind of like the lessons learned episode, and also the published of the Hacker Noon article, which we'll link to in the show notes. Before we get into that, Andrew, do you want to just give us an update on your general business? And you did an ICO, more than 9 months ago with BenjaCoin. Do you want to just kind of update us on what's going on with you and your stuff?
Yeah, it's funny. It was 9 months ago, kind of the late summer last year when we ran the BenjaCoin ICO. And when I talk to people about this market and we talked about things like regulation, we talked about a lot of the things that we're about to dig into. They always ask about, well, how did, they say, how did you do it at BenjaCoin? Or like, how did you think about X or Y or Z? And I'd like to say, like, yeah, it was only 7, 8, 9 months ago, but it may as well have been 100 years. This was so like just a different world. But in the time since, Benja has been doing well. BenjaCoin is doing well. We are ramping up to launch our ad marketplace. So our publishers and vendors will be able to actually interact with the coin here before the end of the quarter. And things are really ramping up there. So it's all positive traction.
What do people? What are the best ways for people to kind of check in on or ask questions or kind of see what's going on?
Yeah, we have our Telegram group, which you can find a link to on benjacoin.com, and also Twitter. Yeah, we're really active on Twitter.
Right on. And it's funny, Telegram, I just had a buddy call me the other day, and he's like, I want to hear about ICOs. I want to do an ICO. And I was like, well, get on Telegram.
Yeah.
But it's funny.
It's a little bit of a it's a little bit of a madhouse on Telegram sometimes, but yeah, I mean, everybody's there, and that's where my best conversations happen.
All right, so Andrew, can you just start and tell us the story of Munchee as you first began to get involved?
So as I think when we did the BenjaCoin sale, we shared a lot of the experience on HackerNoon and on blogs and different ways, and wrote a lot about our conversations with the SEC, wrote a lot about these different things. And the Munchee founder actually, was a reader of HackerNoon, saw a lot of these things, and reached out initially just for a little conversation to kind of talk through some of the things that I had been writing about, and that's how they really came onto my radar.
Cool, and maybe just a quick context of what they do, and then what they wanted your help with.
Yeah, it was a super simple product. Their whole premise, without getting too detailed, was that they looked at the restaurant review platforms. They looked at like Yelp and Foursquare and some of these other ones, and they said there are a few problems with it. The first is that a lot of reviews have to do with like non-food factors, and really talked about things that aren't necessarily material. And also things that tend to skew negative, it's very easy to see the incentive for somebody to write a negative review. But if you go to a restaurant and you have a good experience, that's kind of what you expect, right? So like, why would you write a positive review? So anyway, they sought to address this thing, and they also saw a trend in moving towards a more visual medium. So they had a photo-based food review mobile app. And they launched this thing. They had a pretty clear business model. Their model was that restaurants would incentivize reviewers by saying like, hey, here's like a free, small item like a drink or a fry or, something like that. And as they started to see the ICO market materialize and see all of these things kind of come together, like we all did, they said, maybe we can tokenize it and make it so that, if you were writing a review about restaurant A, you didn't necessarily have to redeem your reward for that review at restaurant A. Maybe you could write a review for restaurant A and B, and then use those rewards and redeem them at restaurant C. So they saw this as like an opportunity for a token model, and reached out because they wanted to roll this out nationwide.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard of it, I thought it was a really cool idea. I mean, to decentralize reviews, on the blockchain, I think it still is a good idea. So then what happened?
So they reached out. They initially said, we really want to do this the right way. We like a lot of the things that you write about. We'd love for you to come on and be a token advisor. And I said, of course. I came on. I met with them a few times down in Palo Alto. had some great conversations and really started to work with them on building up that project. And so, they were going through all the things that every ICO project does. They were writing the white paper and launching a website and building a community. And at first, everything was going really well. Like, for the first month or two, building a lot of momentum and building towards that sale. And then things started to change. And it wasn't totally clear what was going on, but, in retrospect, of course, hindsight being 2020, it became clear that missed phone calls, some advice that they started to, they would say, oh, that's a good idea, and then do the exact opposite. And when I started to voice those concerns, I started hearing things like, oh, we're expanding the team. We've got some new people on board. It's just growing pains. Don't read too much into it. In reality, what happened was, the Munchee management got a little nervous. They were feeling the heat. They were seeing some deadlines coming up. They brought in some new token advisors who, maybe just have different approaches than I do. And they started executing some tasks and doing some things marketing and promotion wise that I think Munchee knew I wasn't totally on board with. They were trying to do it kind of, concurrently, on the side there. And ultimately that's what got them.
Was it kind of a case of too many cooks in the kitchen?
I think it's important to remember when the Munchee ICO was happening, so this is like October, November 2017. Earlier when I said, Benjacoin was like 7, 8, 9 months ago, and that may as well have been 100 years. The Munchee ICO was happening just as things really started to go through a big turn, and people really started to talk to the SEC. The SEC started like sharing some of their first like public opinions directly and things like that. And so it was a funny time. And what Munchee did was they brought in other token advisors who were from other geographic areas. I know one of them came from Singapore and one of them was from Europe or something like that. And they just had different approaches. I think now everybody's aware of where the traps are for an American company or for an American ICO. Back then it wasn't as clear. And when they started having these other voices, I don't know that it was too many cooks in the kitchen, but it was too many cooks speaking different languages.
Right. What are some examples of like, so, back when they did the ICO, it was a very different landscape, and we'll get into that. But like, what are some examples of things that you were advising them to do or not do, and then you sort of realized they were not following your advice at the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, at middle end of 2017, we still thought that a utility token had a place in this marketplace and was like a defensible position. If you were really, really, really thorough in defending that position, you could do it, right? And so we would look at the Howey test and just try and slice and dice it every way possible. And with Munchee, we really felt like we had a strong defensible position as long as we stayed away from things like paid promotion, bounty programs, burning unsold tokens, all that kind of stuff. We thought that we had a good position.
And let me just for some listeners that want to dive into that aren't totally aware. Paid promotion, you just mean like advertising your ICO, that kind of thing. And then the bounty programs were very, very common, a year ago, where it's sort of like sign up with us and you'll get free tokens if you kind of promote our token on forums and just around the internet. And both of those things. So explain why those things are kind of red flags for the SEC.
Two really important pieces of the Howey test, at least as I interpret it, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, not a securities lawyer. This is just one man's opinion. Take it for what you're paying for it. Is that first is if there's a clear expectation of profit from buying something, it's probably a security. And the other is that if there's profit that comes as a result of the effort of a third party, it's also likely a security. So that seems pretty clear. We're looking at paid promotion. That's a third party talking about something and sets off that trap with the Howey test. And then with the bounty program, a clear expectation of profit. I mean, you're earning free token in exchange for effort, right? So you're being a third party promoter, and then you're getting it for free with the intent of selling it, right? So that's a clear profit motive.
So, I want to just be clear to folks, our listeners again, and we're talking about the SEC, which is just U.S. based, which is part of what makes this whole thing tricky. But the logic you're laying out, the Howey test and kind of following these rules, it 9 months ago, it did seem pretty, not easy, but clear if you follow the logic to never say this is an investment, it's going to go up in value, and then that would make it a utility. And that seemed to be what was kind of like the guiding message at that time. So what has changed since then?
Well, the SEC has come out and repeatedly said, they've never seen a token sale that wasn't a security, right? And so they keep on banging that drum. Some of the other, U.S. federal agencies have taken similar, though different stances. And basically, the resounding consensus is that there isn't really a utility token in the eyes of the U.S. government.
And so, saying it's a security, that has all kinds of ramifications. And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that basically mean that it's only available to, in the U.S., accredited investors?
That's right. There are a few different ways to do it, and it might be a little too tricky to get into really on the podcast. But if you're looking to run a security token sale, there's a SEC registration and all these different kind of formats that can take. What's kind of tricky is that then if you register as a security token, easy enough, right? But for it to be usable inside of a product, that sets off like a lot of different traps, right? You can kind of think of it this way: you wouldn't take a share of Disney stock and like use it inside of Farmville, right? It's like to redeem for something, or you certainly wouldn't sell strawberries or whatever you do in Farmville and receive like Disney stock, right? The transmission of a security is just way more regulated than a simple token transaction.
Even in terms of the usefulness of a token, if it's a security, this has come up in our Dogecoin episodes a lot, where if the value is fluctuating so much as it does when it's and perceived as an investment, as a security, it really becomes less useful anyway for transactions, because why would you buy a coffee if the price just went up, twice, or cut in half the moment you walked in that store? But you're saying it even goes beyond that it's actually just the regulations around having a security token be not allowed to be used as a utility.
Right. There's a reason that securities and stock exchanges, securities have to be traded over stock exchanges, and they're just very regulated, right? The way that you transmit them. So you can't really have a security token that's freely transmittable. And that's not even scratching the surface of like a know your customer or anti-money laundering kind of regulation, but that's certainly all involved too.
Do you think this is, to me, this sounds like a new ICO, or somebody who's founding a company and they want to do an ICO, they would just avoid the U.S. altogether. Like what are the things that are going to happen, with this? What do you see as the outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's what you're seeing a lot of ICOs that are running right now. Maybe they'll take the U.S. investor route, but they'll insist that everybody's accredited. But for the most part, people are just steering clear of the United States. That's just kind of what's happening. Or the other thing I will say, and I wrote this when I wrote for Hacker Noon, the post titled "The SEC Called About Our ICO." I answered. One of the things that the representative from the SEC said on the phone was that they only worry about public solicitation of sales. So. You might see a U.S.-based token sale, or you might see a token sale that's happening to U.S. buyers, but it's happening, underground. It's happening kind of privately to groups, groups of token buyers.
So here's a question, man, and I really don't have a clue what the answer is. If a company in the U.S. wants to target U.S. investors and have a security token, and basically to raise money, that token is not going to be really useful outside of its own system. I mean, like what's like I've heard from some companies who are just heavily lawyering up to do their security token. I mean, why even do a token? Why not just do a conventional fundraise?
Yeah, I think that that's something that ultimately, like the SEC would like more people to kind of think and ask, because at some point you kind of hit this point where it's like, well, I should just be raising traditional, seed money or angel money or VC money. There's no real benefit to tokenizing, and maybe that's the point.
So let's say I've got a friend. Actually, this is a real case. I have a friend who called yesterday. And he was great. He doesn't know too much about cryptocurrency, but he's got a great idea for a new business. And he's like, what do I do if I want to do this whole token thing? And I kind of told him, about this limitation, making it a security. What kind of and just the exposure I've had to companies that are just heavily lawyering up. Like, do you have any sense of if a company wants to target U.S. accredited investors, do a security token? How big of a budget does that take them, or can they follow sort of some template rules, or just hire one consultant, or do they really need a huge team of lawyers to do that?
Yeah, it's tricky. So I'm working with a client right now, works in a heavily regulated space, and they're not from like our immediate geographic area. So I went and visited them. They wanted to interview lawyers and ask that question, ask some of some similar questions. And we interviewed 5 different law firms. And I know that this sounds like a bad lawyer joke, but we received 7 different opinions on this specific question. And so the fact of the matter is there's just like not a lot of clarity there. It's very, ambiguous. It's still very, up in the air. And our government here in the United States really does need to act and come up with a new asset class for this kind of thing.
Huh? Like what? Any ideas like what that would be? What that would some outlines around that?
Yeah, it's tricky. I've been trying to pull that together. I don't know that I really have the answer. But yeah, I mean, we need to be able to say that a token is not necessarily a security. And maybe it's drawing a clearer line between, its function as something like a pre-sale of inventory or, utility inside of whatever platform that is. And just say this definitely doesn't convey ownership or revenue sharing or anything like that. Just be very clear about it. I think that's certainly one of the first pieces, but of course it gets more complicated from there.
It's interesting. Like 6 months ago or whatever, I remember listening to like you and Miko Matsumura and folks who were really saying, "Hey, this is good. The SEC is going to come in and regulate this and get rid of the scammers." And at this point, though, I don't know, man. Like, what's your take in general? I'm kind of going back and forth and going into cousin David libertarian mode of like just unregulate everything. And sure, some people will get screwed, but it's my money, it's
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Really, I've got like 3 takes, 3 things to say about that. The first is it really does look like the SEC is maintaining that position where they say not all ICOs are the same. And they're really only taking action against the really big violators, and the really big, kind of scammy projects. They know that there's a lot of gray area. They're perfectly reasonable about that, it seems. They're going after, I forget the name of the sale, but the sale that had like Floyd Mayweather, involved.
Oh, yeah.
And like they use like celebrity endorsements and things. Yeah. I mean, that stuff has no place, in this market. So they're going after those guys. The thing that I think is happening, and I don't have any direct experience to back this up, but it seems like the SEC is also realizing like there's just so many of these sales happening, and that they should be looking to exchanges as a control point, and say, if they really kind of lean on the exchanges and say, hey, you guys need to be complying and help us enforce like this kind of stuff, that may be a good way to really protect the standard investor, which is their whole mission here, right? They just don't want people to be getting scammed. And if they can work with the exchanges directly to make that happen, that's a really good outcome too. So I suspect that the SEC will continue working with exchanges and really kind of do that while we wait for my third point, which is this action that we're all looking for really does have to be legislative action, right? So it has to come from the legislative arm of our government. And the unfortunate reality is that the legislative agenda is really set already for 2018. It would take a really huge event to move token sales to the top of that legislative agenda or anywhere near the top. We're in the middle of like midterm elections. It's not a really great time to be doing big, bold things politically. So really, I'm looking at this and going like, I don't expect legislative action to happen until 2019, unfortunately. Which puts the SEC, FinCEN, the IRS, everybody that wants to run an ICO or a token sale, really puts everybody in a funny position where we're going to be sitting in this gray area for a long time.
That's interesting, man. I mean, and there's more info, I think, on those 3 points on your Hacker Noon article. But on that last point, it's interesting to me. I've been listening to interviews with some senators and representatives in Congress, and they're all up in arms about the Facebook data breach. And it's kind of like, great, but like, what, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years too late. And it kind of feels like the same thing in crypto. It's like, we don't expect Congress, well, I guess we'd like to expect them to be on the ball, but they're not going to be, leading the way. But I'm seeing this whole Facebook data breach as such a huge opportunity for the blockchain solutions for social networks, where it's like you own your data and it's encrypted and it's not centralized by this massive corporation. I think Facebook's in trouble, but I also think it'd be great to get some, representatives in our government really thinking about the blockchain as a solution to this, what's called the Facebook problem.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, Facebook's a totally, separate subject. I feel like we could talk about that for hours. But yeah, I mean, part of the problem is, right, cryptocurrency, tokens, those kind of things. These are kind of hard concepts to get, especially to understand at a level where you have like an expert level of knowledge and you can, act thoughtfully about it. I mean, it's a very young market. There are a lot of moving parts. It would be really great to see some members of our government cozy up with the crypto space beyond just like accepting Bitcoin as a campaign donation, and really get into the trenches. There's a lot of nuance here. It's very complex, and we need something to happen.
That's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, a lot of that's how if a representative of government is into crypto, that's how they lead. They're saying, I was the first person to start taking Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Hey, I had a question going back to
we get it, Rand Paul. We get it. You're cool.
I had a thought going back to your comment about talking to the clients that had 5 lawyers with 7 different opinions. Nobody's an expert in this space. It's such a new space. But of those 5 lawyers, like, what was your sense of how many of them, sort of got it, or were they sort of just brand new and making it up about crypto? And how many of them, really knew what they were talking about?
I'd say it's 50-50. It was so funny because like we would sit down in the room and without me saying anything, without them really knowing who I was, in some cases I wasn't on like the calendar invite or whatever. These lawyers would bring up Munchee and they would offer an opinion about like, hey, you don't want to be Munchee. You don't want to do X, Y, Z. And I'm sitting there going like, well, that's not what Munchee did. Like, that's not even anything.
Right.
That's not what got them in trouble. It's not what they were doing. It's not anything. So, there's a lot of kind of blind following of, blog posts and things like that that's happening. And look, I don't fault anybody, right? I mean, this is a crazy space. Things are moving so quickly. It's hard to really dig in and truly understand everything that's going on. But they're lawyers. That's their function here is that they really should.
Andrew, this has been great, very very informative. Could you just summarize for the listeners, what is different for launching a token, back then, let's say 9 months ago versus today?
Yeah, totally different market, totally different space. I mean, when we did Benjacoin, there weren't a lot of publicly available resources, and it was even less clear about how the government thought about these things and what was going to end up happening. And back then, a token sale is something that you could do with just like a lot of hustle, and the budget really didn't need to be much. Especially, we took this no paid promotion stance back then, and if you weren't doing that, there was nothing really to spend money on. Now, when I talk to people who are thinking about launching a token sale, they are being quoted from, ICO marketing agencies, anywhere from, $100,000 to $500,000. And I'm hearing, lawyers saying, yeah, it'll cost about $200,000 to like go through all of this stuff and get all that ready. I mean, it really, very quickly has turned into an expensive, complicated proposition that may be riskier today than it was back then.
Okay, how about some good news? It's still an exciting space, but I feel like we're kind of just being the party's over.
Yeah, that's increasingly my role. Yeah, it's just being a party pooper.
Party pooper. Well, maybe that's what's needed. It's still an exciting space, and as Dan pointed out, this last quarter was still the largest in terms of dollars raised in the ICO space. But hey, thanks, Andrew, for being on the podcast. How do folks reach you if they want to get involved with you or hear more what's going on?
Yeah, the best way is Twitter, just at Andrew J. Chapin, Chapin.
Andrew J. Chapin. We'll put it in the show notes. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us and listening to Coloring Crypto, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.